is a story close to my heart. My father-in-law started his working life in the pits, and his father before him spent his entire working life as a miner, a very skilled practitioner of the art. For years I've heard all about it, and honestly I've been endlessly fascinated by hearing about the reality of a life lived underground, or a working life underground. As an archaeologist, I'm also aware that we have been mining for one thing or another in this country, not just for hundreds of years, but for thousands. Our Neolithic ancestors dug mines to find flint from which they made their tools. Later it was copper and tin that was wanted for making bronze, and that attracted the wider world to us, to Great Britain. The Phoenicians came to Cornwall 3,500 years ago in search of tin, and then the Romans did likewise. After that, of course, it was coal, the fuel that fired the Industrial Revolution, that changed the world and that powered the British ships that ruled the waves. Safe to say, mining is in the blood and bones of Great Britain. Now, of course, it's only an industry of the past. The pits are gone, and the communities that lived and died by them had to find new ways to live if they survived at all. There are, though, those who have not forgotten the long story of the coal mines, and rightly so. GB News Yorkshire reporter Kevin Larkin is at a memorial in Stainforth, which has been built to remember the Hatfield colliery. Kevin, I understand you've been joined by one of the former workers.
That's right, Neil. Yes, Mick Lanigan is a former miner, and he's also been a leading campaigner to preserve the headstocks and the headgears you can see behind me. There are two here. And Mick, I guess just to begin with, can you tell us a bit about the history of Stainforth? Because every pit village, every pit town in South Yorkshire has its own story to tell. What's Stainforth?
Initially, Stainforth lived around and existed around the Stainforth Keeby Canal area. When the pit started to be sunk in 1911, I think the first sodwalk were lifted. That literally gave birth to the Stainforth as we know it now, but also the neighbouring village of Dunscroft, and that's where it took its main initial workforce from those two villages. I think it was 3,000, 3,500 at its height that it employed from them two villages.
And tell us a bit about your time here at this mine.
I started after I was 18. My dad followed like a lot of Yorkshiremen followed, that their lads weren't going to start down pit. And when I got to 18, it was, Dad, you can't tell me what I'm doing now, and I started. A lot of my mates started straight from school, so they were already here. But basically, we grew up together as lads. We had each other's back as young people, and then at work, we had each other's back. I once told by an old miner, if you ever fighting with another collier in a car park, always shake hands at the end of it. He might be bloke digging you out on Monday. So,
and obviously, we can't talk about the history of coal without talking about the miners' strike. Tell us a bit about that and the legacy for Stainforth. What was it like here during the miners' strike?
This village was solid. All the way through, it was solid. We did have some men break the strike in November and in the August before it, but these were men that didn't live in the community itself. It were anathema to this community that men would break a strike. It were a year that there are not many people that say that they wouldn't do it again. It gives us no satisfaction to say we were called liars. We were said that, people said that we were gilding the lily, that weren't as many pits going to shut. The proof's in the pudding. We didn't lie. And
then after the miners' strike, many pit villages and towns across South Yorkshire were devastated, I think that's fair to say. But Stainforth had a sort of double blow, because this mine didn't actually close, but it didn't work to your advantage. Tell me a bit about that.
It closed in 1993. That's when it first went from a nationalised industry into a private industry. The problem that we had is all our villages, and by that time the workforce had extended into Thorn and Moor Ends, because Thorn Pit had closed and we got all their workforce as well. So all that workforce lost that employment at this pit. The problem we found from 1993 is we were constantly told that we couldn't get any regeneration money into this village or the area, simply because we had a working coal mine. No miners. I think out of those villages we had, at most, we had about 12 men working down here. The rest of them were busting from all over Nottingham, North Yorkshire, etc. But we lost that employment, but we didn't get that regeneration that other areas got.
So you had a double blow because you couldn't have the miners working in the mine, but because you had the mine, you couldn't get the regen money.
Exactly, and that's why, you know, the recent announcement that there's regeneration money there for us has been a massive plus for our community.
And this is a huge thing. The government's given £21.6 million of Towns Funds money to Stainforth, which has a population of just over 6,000. And I think if you contrast that with Doncaster down the road, they got 25 million for a much bigger population. So this is transformative. Are you hoping that this will make a difference? Because there's plans for all around here, isn't there? Just run me through what you're hoping to see from this Towns Fund regeneration money.
On the headstocks themselves, we're looking at, obviously, at the moment, as you can see, it's a pile of stone and metal in middle of desolation. All of this area is being developed anyway under the unitary plan, the Unity plan, sorry. So there is development going to be happening, but there's more development needed, and this £21 million will give us a hell of a lot of shot in the arm to regenerate not just this area, but regenerate the shopping area in the village, to form a country park. And you look round and you can see the state of these old pit tips, and it's all going to be regenerated and brought back up.
And finally, these aren't the only memorial that you've got in Stainforth to the mining industry. Tell us very briefly about the sort of others you've got in the town.
We've been working for the last 7 years to try and get a memorial garden in Stainforth. Again, it's not a memorial garden just for Stainforth, although it's in our village. It's a memorial garden for all the men that worked at pit. When we first started, we started looking for a lot of information. One of them was fatalities. We found from turning the first sod up until 1970, when we started it in a problem through whatever laws that we couldn't get into the thing, we'd found 78 fatalities. Youngest were a lad of 15, the oldest were an old lad of 72, and we felt the need to do something. And what happened, because we put in for the money from the town fund, it opened another purse called the Accelerated Fund, and we've got a grant, and we've just had put up a new memorial. We've got a memory wall coming up, and we're currently developing the garden itself.
It's fantastic. So a lot of money going in and a lot of pride, as you can see, Neil, in the past, but obviously bringing that into the future now, and hopefully a bright new future ahead for Stainforth.
Oh, I do hope so. It seems so extraordinary to me that an industry, a population that was so much a part of Britain. As I was growing up, the presence of the miners was just something that you took for granted, that they were out there, and that it's a population that has effectively become extinct, a whole way of life that's just gone over the hill into history. I just find it profoundly moving. Now, I'm going to be joined now by Bob Young from the Scotland branch of Coalfields Regeneration Trust, who can speak with us this evening. Hello, Bob. I'm so glad we've been able to join with you.
Yeah,
you were a miner. You were a miner, yes? That was your life also?
Yeah, I joined the pit when I was 14.
Goodness me, 14. And when was your last day underground, so to speak?
Well, when they closed the pit, that was back in 87. They closed Comrie in the January 87. So my last day down the pit was probably pre-Christmas, 86.
86. Now, like me, you live in the central belt of Scotland. I think you're in Alloa, is that right?
No, I'm in Dunfermline.
Oh, Dunfermline, I beg your pardon. Now, but like me, I'm in Stirling, in the central belt, and surrounded by the legacy of the coal mines. And so many men that I meet of a certain age and of a certain vintage, worked in the pits. What does that past mean to you and to those that you live among?
Well, if you look at Fife, I've done all my coal mining in Fife. If you look at Fife, we had 38,000 miners in Fife. If you take it, half of them were married, that brings you up to 56,000. The married ones had a couple of kids. And every industry in Fife will actually benefit from the mines, the pubs, the local grocers, everybody benefit. What the mines Well, I tried to emphasise to people that if you couldn't read or write, you could get a job in the pits because we needed miners, obviously. Nowadays, it's very, very difficult for anyone who can't read or write to actually get a job. And so we provide a great outlet for people who had that disability.
That's what always strikes me, Bob, that the mines, amongst many other practical jobs, were something that was there that absorbed and gave meaningful working lives to countless thousands of people. Who weren't cut out for whatever, maybe going to university or all the other things that are pushed at the moment, and the absence of things like or trades and ways of life like mining, it's left such a void in our society for people who had so much to give in terms of a meaningful working life.
Correct, and I mean the fact that everybody got money and our money went done around. It wasn't like today where people tend to invest their money or put them into banks. Our money done around the communities. We spent food, tea, and
I think we're losing our connection to you there.
And unfortunately, that's all gone now.
Thank you, Bob.
Sorry,
I think the connection there is a bit touch and go. But thank you so much for your contribution tonight, Mo. If I can turn to you, that it's unbelievable to me that way of life has gone. I cannot quite. I know it happened, but that industry that was a life and a culture for tens of thousands of people, it's gone.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're asking me because I'm from the northeast, aren't you?
In part.
It's everywhere I look, though, the legacy, from there's Woodhorn Mining Museum. There's the Mining Institute, which celebrates, the life of
But it's all just
miners.
memory, it's not
It
real.
is just memory. We've also got the Miner Gala, of course, we've got that as well. And there is something about it being sort of steeped in nostalgia and memories and all the rest of it. And it is, it's becoming a museum piece, isn't it? And whilst that's happening, you also see all the kind of former mining communities who've been pretty much decimated by the kind of removal of that way of life from there.
Kevin's contributor there, who spoke, as they always do, about the camaraderie and having each other's backs.
Yeah.
That has been taken away from so many people. Having that to call your own, knowing that you were part of a team that were like soldiers, like warriors, were looking after one another's lives. To not have that in your life, and that there are now generations coming through that don't get to experience it, is such an immortal sadness.
It's the lesson.
Absolutely. I mean, in some ways, look, I don't lament the fact that we no longer have lots of deep coal mines that are spewing out pollution in this great archipelago, as you might call it, of ours, Neil. But for me, what's absolutely unforgivable, given that there was 160,000 miners in 1980, was a very deliberate, political attempt, let's be honest, by the Thatcher government to not only rely less on coal, but to destroy the trade unions and to destroy that particular political force in Britain. And, for those of a certain age watching, probably remember coming home from school in the 1970s and the three-day working week and the lights not being on. And the blame for that was pinned on the miners. So that set the scene for the politics of the 1980s and what now, sociologists would call the deindustrialisation or the start of deindustrialisation of Britain. But again, what I think is absolutely unforgivable, and even now, is these communities have not been given the support to transition from that old industrial model to the new industrial model, like the green jobs that we talk about. There's 300 or so green jobs in the economy. Heat pump installers, for example, is going to be a new job in the economy. Where is the support in these communities, these former mining communities, for the individuals, for the sons and daughters of those miners, to grasp these new opportunities? And that's why the politicians call them left behind communities, because the jobs that are now there and have been there for several years are 0-hour contracts. They're in warehouses. They're in, they're not quality jobs, and it's certainly not the dignity of work, Neil, that you're talking about, which is the camaraderie of those old pit villages.
What do you say to that? That word dignity. That's really. Thanks for bringing that word to the forefront of my mind, because that's what the mining industry did for those communities, not just the miners, but for their wives and their families and the children coming through.
I mean, I would just echo many of the sentiments that have already been shared. I mean, I think we're only now beginning to really reconcile the legacy of the industrialisation, the loss of place, community, pride, dignity, as you rightfully mentioned. And now we're only 20, 30 years later beginning to question, well, maybe everyone shouldn't be going to university. Maybe we should be investing in our industry and productivity and rebuilding communities and thinking, having that kind of joined up thinking that give people long-term opportunities that really give them a sense of real pride in their nation and their community. And I think that we're still missing that real reconciliation with that legacy. And I think would make a really huge difference.
Yeah.
These are such important conversations to be having, you know, that we're talking about the need to see each other's faces, the need to get away from the coarseness that we've had in the way that we've been interacting, the need to reinvest communities with dignity. You know, this is important stuff that, you know, that we just cannot take for granted and overlook. Still to come, we meet the 87-year-old